So please welcome Ashley Norval, who's the Manager of Technology, Adoption and Industry Capability, Research and Innovation at the Australia Pork Limited. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So I guess already we've heard a lot this morning about the trends around social licence to farm, traceability, etc. And what it says to me is that it's really all about the consumer. At the end of the day, that's who is buying our product across any industry in agriculture in Australia. And so today I thought that I would just talk to you about a couple of the ways that our innovation at Australian Pork Limited is supporting industry integrity. And before I kick off into that, I should also say that we are an RDC, Australian Pork, but we also handle marketing and we also handle policy. Essentially that's because about 15 years ago, 3 separate bodies came together to work for, I guess, the greater good of the pork industry, partly so that we could obviously combine resources, but also because we are such a small industry that it just made more sense. So we are a little bit different to the other RDCs that sit around the table as well. So today I'm just going to talk to you, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the pig industry because I'm going to hazard a guess that there could be a few in the room that haven't had a lot to do with pigs. Also be talking about a couple of the ways that we approach our whole value chain integrity program. One of them is through our education program, which is only quite new, and the other one is through our traceability system. So in Australia, we have about 272,000 sows at the moment. It is on the increase, but a realistic increase per year, we would like for it to be sort of around that 10 to 15% mark. And at the moment, the industry is in a pretty good place, which is fantastic. And I guess with the new market opening in China, hopefully soon, this provides a lot of opportunity for our growers as well. So currently we're slaughtering about 5 million pigs a year. And as a bit of a fun fact, if we were to double that and send 10 million pigs across to China, they could eat that in 52 hours. We've got about 1,400 pig producers in Australia. It's a very, I guess, to put it in perspective, I could speak to 5 people and I'd be talking to 50% of production. So there's some really, really big guys at the top end of the chain. However, there are lots of other guys that contribute to this. So as an RDC, one of the things that we're continually trying to do, I guess, is come up with information and relevant information to all levels of production rather than just, the big or little end of town. About 90% of our production systems are conventionally housed, which means indoors to some level. They might be on deep litter or they might be in sheds. And generally, the average Australian would eat about 26 kilos of pork in the year. So of that, 10 kilos would be about 10 kilos would be fresh, and the rest processed. So just while we're on the process topic, and I want you to keep this figure in mind for a bit later, about 70% of your processed pork products, so salami, bacon, ham, etc., is made through imported pork. All fresh pork that's sold in Australia has to be produced in Australia. It's biosecurity, illegal to import any product with bones in it or fresh. However, importers can import frozen product and process it and then obviously release for selling. And I guess to put our herd size in Australia in a bit of perspective with the rest of the world, the USA has 6 million sows and China has 50 million. So with that, like any RDC, we have a 5-year strategy. We're currently 2 years into that. And essentially the 2 things that I'm going to be talking about today is driving value chain integrity and improving capability. We sort of covered on this before, but these are what our housing systems look like. So on the top left there, you've got a conventional housing system on a slatted floor. On the right, it's a deep litter production system. And on the bottom there, it could be outdoor production. This shows you where all the piggeries are in Australia. To give the pink pins, even though it's a very condensed map, I'm sorry about that, but Australia's a big place. The pink pins are APIC certified, so that's our QA certification system in industry. The yellow pins are sites that aren't QA certified but still producing, and the green pins are abattoirs. And as you can see, there's actually not a lot of processors in Australia, which is another issue that our industry faces. The rough movement of pork supply in Australia. I mentioned before that 70% of processed pork products have been imported. So this is what this is showing you here. And we don't actually export a lot at the moment, only about 34,000 tonnes a year. Most of it is used for domestic consumption. So I guess on to our education system, education resources that I talked to you about. It became very apparent to us that, and I guess it's not just in the pork industry, it's across all of agriculture. There's a big divide between what the general consumer knows and children know and what is actually done to produce food in Australia. So essentially we have developed a suite of resources that cover from kindergarten through to year 10. And they cover all aspects of pork production in Australia. We have also just finished a draft of a cooking with pork unit, so I guess we're trying to educate consumers starting at a younger level of basically how to use our product to the best of their ability. So it's the first of our resources that actually focus on how to cook pork as opposed to pork production, but it's aimed at years 9 and 10. And essentially what we're trying to do here is, I guess, a bit of a two-pronged approach. It is an education about our industry, but it's also hoping to sort of drive a few more domestic markets up and, I guess, try and relay a few of those myths about how to cook pork, etc. The distribution plan at the moment. The plan was to have 400 schools across Australia with a copy by the end of 2016, in June, sorry. We currently have over 650. We're not the only RDC to be doing this. It's something that most of the RDCs have jumped on board with. It's something that's very popular out there as well. So I'd encourage you that, if you know somebody with kids in schools of any age, to get in contact with your RDC and encourage them to be teaching about any kind of food and fibre production in Australia, because it's very important. So we can look at it really quickly by saying, as a minimum, 650 teachers are using these at the moment. That means they have access to a very conservative estimate of 19,500 children who would have access to a further 2 people each to tell about the product. So this potentially could be a good way of reaching the general consumer as well, rather than just at the shop front, sort of trying to delve a bit deeper into that. And essentially, they're distributed all over Australia. So the next part of my talk is about our pork supply chain integrity program, and this is again a multifaceted approach. We work together with the Australian government through the National Residue Survey. We have our PigPass database, so for those of you that don't know, PigPass is our NVD system, our APIC quality assurance system, and our Fizz Trace traceback mechanism all work together to ensure an accurate pork supply chain integrity program, and it's managed internally by ourselves through our CRM customer management program. So Fizz Trace, it's a rapid and robust traceability validation system that's been developed for the Australian pork industry, and essentially it has the potential for complete supply chain traceability for pork, and it's used in conjunction with other traceability systems, which I'll touch on a little bit later. Essentially, it's a very complex technology, but at the end of the day, everything that the pig eats or is exposed to through housing, flooring systems, down to the type of soil that the grain was grown on, etc., the water quality that's coming through the pipe, it all leads to essentially a fingerprint of trace elemental discrimination in that animal. So how this works is over time we built up a massive database We can take a 20-gram sample of, say, fresh product, for example. Maybe something went wrong with the steak. We want to trace back where that's come from. In 24 hours, we can tell you the farm of origin and down to the shed of origin in some instances. If it's, say, bacon, we can tell you if it's an imported product, and we can tell you the country of origin and the region of origin, depending on that country as well. But our main focus, of course, is having that traceability system for all Australian product. And a lot of this is around label claims and verifying that if you're using that pork mark logo, that has been made with 100% Australian pork. Essentially, abattoirs in Australia collect samples for us. They're collected through every kill batch and analysed and stored on the database, so that if there is a problem and we do have to do a Fizz Trace trace back, we analyse that sample in the same manner, and it'll look through our computer database system and tell us where that's come from. It's something that we're continuously working on, because the signature, as you can imagine, changes over time through each farm. They might change feed, different elements are built up in the pipes, all sorts of things. So it's something that has to be continuously maintained and continuously collected. This is a bit of a confusing diagram, but it's showing you, I guess, the country of origin and the types of profiling that they make. I should also mention as well that it's been 100% accurate to date. So we might do a Fizz Trace trace back if there's a residue detection. I mentioned before the National Residue Survey. If something came up in that and we needed to find out where that animal's come from, we can use it to do that. Compliance and labelling verification, a food safety incident, and of course we're mainly concerned about that in the domestic market, but we have used it in overseas where it's been claimed that it's been an Australian carcass. Residue detection through the National Residue Survey, and if there's an export market customer complaint. We are governed by business rules that have been endorsed by APL's Pork Processor Referral Group, but having said that, we do also do random testing throughout all kinds of label claims as well. So you never know when it's going to come up. But essentially, again, we can take in this case, it's a bacon sample, and work out through our chain, basically, if it's country of origin, if it's been imported, which it shouldn't be because it's got that little pork mark logo on it, or the farm of origin. We also use our quality assurance system to validate label claims that have been made even in domestic product. So in this case, it's been claimed that it's a free-range product, so we might randomly test that that is actually the case. And because we maintain the database for our quality assurance program as well, that's how sort of that whole supply chain system works together. I guess to give you a bit of a comparison, in the pork industry, we don't have NLAS tagging or any RFID for traceback systems. This costs 5 cents a pig to implement this system in the pork industry. It would cost us $3 per tag alone. So not only is it an accurate system for us, it's also a cost-effective one, and one that we'll continue to back. Any questions?
Well done, thank you very much. Righto, any discussion? Question? Yeah, here we go, right at the front here.
Ross Farrell from Tasmania. I'm just interested in the Fizz Trace, and was just wondering, first of all, it seems very impressive, and I was wondering, is the elemental fingerprint specific enough to always guarantee that you can identify the farm? Because there's also, you could be looking at a molecular fingerprint also, which would be more specific, so I'm just curious whether elemental fingerprinting is sufficient for your purposes.
Yes, it is. And as I said, it is 100% accurate. Having said that, we definitely, I guess we feel like we're still in development stages of this technology. So as you say, there's always room for improvement as well. But at the moment, yep, definitely.
Okay.
And I should also say, in a lot of instances, this also helps that we are a smaller industry and we're able to, collect data from a lot smaller subset than, say, the red meat sector. But having said that, the technology itself is perfectly capable of working just on elemental profiling.
Thanks. And also, could I ask what technique is actually used? Because I can think it's either ICP mass spectrometry or it's a laser-induced spectrometry.
It's ICP.
Sorry, ICP?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Did everybody know what he was talking about then?
Next question.
I think we were having a boffin discussion then. Right, down the back, Sean. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hi Ashley, this is Ryan Hargraves from Riverlea, Australia. You spoke of the enormous potential for the Chinese market in pork sales. Are there any specific ways APL are looking to take advantage of this, or are you relying purely on future demand to drive exports?
That's a good question, Ryan. Yes, APL are taking a number of initiatives on this. We have had contingencies to and from China for quite a number of months now, ever since this was announced, basically trying to make inroads into the market. I mentioned before that it'd take the Chinese 52 hours to eat 10 million pigs, so clearly we need something that's going to differentiate our product and make it, I guess, really not get lost in the sea of pork that must be happening over there. So essentially, another one of the marketing projects that we've got up at the moment is being termed, I think, pink diamond pork or something along those lines. And it's basically trying to formulate a way that we can make Australian pork a totally unique and essentially a really high-end market for the Chinese, I guess, sort of middle-class privilege to upper-class consumer. Having said that, it's certainly not APL's job to increase profitability of individual farms, but the only way that we're going to successfully enter the Chinese market is if we present a united front. So there's been a lot of discussion with, the Riverleas, Sunpork, QNPH, anyone that's interested in being involved, that we basically have a united front going into the market rather than individual companies, sort of grappling for it, because, as mentioned, there's plenty of opportunity for all involved. So, yes.
You could take a lead from the dairy industry and have a disunited front in China. It's quite ineffective.
No, thanks.
Okay, one last question here in the middle, and then we'll move on to Susan Madden.
Matthew Feely, Mariba. Ashley, you were saying 70% of Australian consumed pork processed is coming from overseas, but 34,000 tonne of Australian pork is exported. No doubt there's a lot of time and effort put into trying to market Australian pork into China and exporting things. Have you just written off the Australian market as just being not valuable? Is it a higher value proposition to export?
That's definitely not the case. And the marketing team have definitely a multifaceted approach to that. I guess at the moment, whilst the focus may seem like it's on the Chinese market, there's plenty of other markets that will open up as a result of that, and not forgetting that actually demand for pork in Australia is very high at the moment. It's, I guess it's unfortunate for the red meat sector, but due to a number of reasons, the price of beef and lamb are quite high in proportion to pork at the moment, which is good for us. We couldn't have predicted that, but the demand is there. So, yes, we have our eyes on all sorts of balls at the same time, but we certainly haven't lost sight of the fact that the growth is there. And really our biggest issue in the pork industry at the moment is not having that capability to immediately grow with the infrastructure that's needed for pork production in order to meet all those demands, potentially. So I guess we, again, mentioning that we're only very small, so we sort of have a bit of a multi-targeted approach, and we try and sort of make the biggest gain and the biggest leverage from the producer dollar that we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody thank Ashley Norval. That was really interesting.